Thank you so much for being here with us today for our first virtual panel discussion as part of our speaker event series. We've been hosting the speaker event series for the past 2 years, but are now moving to the digital space. As you may already know, this program was supposed to take place during the North American International Auto Show next month, but due to the cancellation, we had to find different ways to still be able to deliver and share all of this valuable content with you. So I would like to thank the German American Business Council for supporting this initiative, but also a big thank you to our panelists who made time out of their busy schedule to be here with us today and share their industry insights and knowledge with us. With the topic focused on multicultural auto buying during COVID-19, we really want to learn more about why vehicle sales have been impacted and how they have been impacted during this time, and especially how multicultural groups are impacting the auto industry as well through their purchasing behavior. So with that said, I would like to introduce our first panelist for today, Dania Rich Spencer, who is a vice president at Escalent.
Escalent is a consumer behavior and data analytics company located in the Detroit area, and we are organized around 5 verticals: automotive, health, financial services, technology, and retail. And I've always worked within the automotive vertical, focusing on customer sat, customer experience, advanced product research, as well as commercial vehicle and dealers. For the past 10 years or so, I've personally conducted a lot of research with consumers on their attitudes and behaviors towards electric vehicles and other alternative powertrains. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I would say, again, doing a lot of engaging with consumers around their attitudes and behaviors towards autonomous vehicles. So I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, feel free to go.
Yep, I will. My name is Mark Bland, and first I'd like to thank you, Lydia, for putting this panel together. I think the timing is perfect because people with COVID are really hungry or thirsty for information and knowledge, and I think I'm blessed to be around a great group of people, Dania and Roman, to share what we know. I'm Mark Bland. I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer for IHS Markit, which most would consider the global leaders in automotive data and intelligence. And we have one of the largest, if not the largest, diverse consumer data store, not just in America, but in the world. And so I'm here to share on behalf of IHS Markit. Thank you, Lydia.
Thank you, Mark. Roman.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you, Lydia, for organizing this and bringing us together here. I am Roman Fernandez. I'm a senior consultant with Roland Berger. It's a strategy consulting firm, and I'm with the Detroit office. In my current role, I advise automotive and transportation companies on business strategy and corporate innovation. Over the last 3 years at Roland Berger, I've worked with leading OEMs and suppliers in the automotive industry to explore solutions across the 4 major trends in transportation, which are mobility, autonomous, the digitalization, and finally electrification. So prior to Roland Berger, I've actually worked in product development as an engineer for 8 years at Ford Motor Company and 7 years at Robert Bosch in Detroit and other locations in Germany, Austria, Brazil, China, Turkey, and India. In addition, I've also volunteered for several non-profit projects in diversity and education in Detroit, as well as in Cape Town in South Africa. So I have this multicultural educational background and life experiences that augment my career in automotive, that I can bring a unique perspective into how multicultural behavior, buying behavior in automotive would develop in this COVID-19 crisis.
Thank you, everyone. Really excited to have you here today, and I think this is going to be a valuable panel where you can share a lot of insights into your studies that are new for our audience here, but also about how COVID has really impacted the automotive industry, especially from a multicultural background, because we've heard a lot of panels and a lot of information about the automotive industry during this time. However, not necessarily with a focus on the different multicultural groups. So when we look at the African American groups, Hispanic groups, or Latinx, and Asians, for example, that do make up the multicultural market. And so I'd like to kick it off with you, Mark, and talk a little bit about your role. So I know you're responsible for the development and the enhancement of multicultural business opportunities, where you work directly with the OEMs and other companies in the automotive industry. And so how has COVID-19 really forced your clients to adjust in this climate and in this space? And if we take, for example, the restructuring of the dealerships.
So first, I'd like to say that this COVID is real. A lot of people have come to us and asked us to look at the last big crisis, the most recent, which was the recession, 08, 09. And I consult with my auto clients and tell them clearly, similar but very different. Why? Because during the recession, 08, 09, yes, people lost their finances, they lost homes, they lost jobs, but there wasn't a lot of direct loss of life. COVID-19 is actually killing people. And so it's a different animal that we're dealing with here. And so with that, I would say that COVID-19 is still ongoing. So I could just tell you some of the things that the auto industry is dealing with as of today, because we're still learning and still adjusting and adapting accordingly. I would say the first thing was the fact that the shutdown. There were state directed shutdowns of the retail network. So as big as Ford, General Motors, Toyota, Honda, Mercedes are, they're in the business of selling cars. And if you close the dealerships down, there's not a lot that marketing or PR or manufacturing can do, because the outlet to sell cars has been shut down. Along those lines, what has happened is the consumer is constantly evolving, and we're changing to this new normal, which anything that has to do with sharing, the word sharing, is taboo right now. So the biggest threat to new vehicle most recently has been this whole piece about ride sharing, i.e. Uber and Lyft, and focused on millennials, which is the new customer, because all the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, is what it stands for, which is how we in auto define Ford, Chrysler, Toyota, Honda, et cetera, and General Motors, is they were concerned about the millennials not wanting to buy cars in the future because if they were so hooked on ride sharing. Now you can't pay, because I have a few millennials in my house here, you can't pay them to get an Uber or Lyft. And I think what's happening is they're starting to trend back and they want their own vehicle, but they don't want to spend a lot on a vehicle. We'll get to that, I think, later. The third thing is, from a dealer standpoint, now that dealerships are opening up, people still aren't real keen on being close and having contact and sitting down one-on-one with a dealer or finance person, so everything's going digitally. And unfortunately, a lot of dealers are my friends, and they're going to probably hate this, but I don't think they're ready for this forced digital age. And so I say that to say where we're going, now move to the future, I think, is that we're doing a lot of TV watching, we're doing a lot of music listening and things. So I think the likes of Netflix, traditional TV, Pandora, Sirius, those type of outlets are going to be huge as far as being champions to get messages out to the consumer base to say we are open and we have these new touchless processes in place, and then get people to be less afraid and more encouraged to get back in the market. So that was a mouthful, but there's a lot going on. And right now it's a very interesting space, which I'm glad to be a part of. But I think, as I said earlier, we're still in the middle of it, so we're learning. That's my thought.
Yeah, thank you for your thoughts. And so, especially with the different cultures, I want to hear a little bit more about that from you, but we'll get into that in a few minutes here. But I wanted to also hear from Roman and Dania. And Dania, especially at Escalent, I see that there has been a lot of content shared. There has been a new EV study that was put out. And as far as the content goes, I see a lot of articles focused on the shopping behavior and the consumer behavior really changing forever due to COVID. And how do you think that that will change in the automotive sector?
Right. So thank you, Lydia. Yes, we've done a fair amount of research over the last couple of months as we're kind of in the worst part of COVID, and it sounds like we're at the beginning of the end, hopefully. And just to echo what Mark had said about the dealers and what you just said about changing online shopping and purchase behavior forever, you know, COVID-19 definitely has to accelerate certain mobility trends. And we are seeing in our research that there is a reduction in those shared mobility modes of transportation, and that isn't necessarily by choice at this point, right? Because we've been on lockdown and people are working from home, so the reduced frequency in using public transit and Uber and Lyft and, you know, the app-based rideshare, that's being reduced now, not so much by choice, but by being forced to do that. So the question becomes, is that going to be permanently changed? And it could be. One area that I do believe will be permanently changed by this whole terrible historical event is the way consumers purchase vehicles. As Mark said, dealers were dabbling in digital retail. Certainly the large and very large dealer groups were able to execute on digital retail fairly well. But there were a lot of dealers who were dabbling in it. They weren't doing it great. And then they woke up one day and their state shut them down. So they were forced to go digital or to improve their digital experience essentially overnight. And the reason why I think that's not going to change, and we're not going to go back to the way it was, is because we're all buying groceries online. Some of us for the first time, right? We're getting further conditioned by Amazon in one-click ordering. So, and some of us have telehealth during this whole thing. So there's no reason to believe that we shouldn't be able to purchase a vehicle online. And consumers are very open to that. Our research shows that they would like to negotiate, go through the negotiating process with the transaction price. They're completely comfortable with signing the paperwork. They'd like to go through the whole trade-in review process online. So this is not something that you have to bring consumers along for. They are open, they desire, and now after the whole COVID thing, they're going to be expecting a good retail experience when they're in the market to buy a vehicle.
Right. Yeah, that's really insightful. And I think whether that is going to be digital or still continue to also be part physical, of course, what do you think the different cultural groups are going to look for in those purchases? And so, you know, what does that look like for the African American population? What does it look like for Hispanic and for the Asians? And are OEMs looking at those specific cultures differently now that we're in COVID and then also post-COVID? How do you think that is going to change? Maybe Mark and Roman here.
I would, this is Mark Bland. So I just want to point out a couple of facts here. And I've talked to quite a few of my OEM partners about this. One, it's no secret, because if you just watch any of the news, African Americans have been disparately impacted by this thing we call COVID-19, to the tune of, in some large metropolitan areas right here in Detroit, New York, and Philadelphia, to name a few, African Americans have represented 70% or more of the fatalities. And that is just over the top. So what is happening so far, which I can speak on by fact, is some of the OEMs, when they were dormant, I say dormant meaning they didn't have a retail outlet, they couldn't go into their offices and work as collective groups face-to-face, et cetera. What they did is said, hey, we had some marketing budget, et cetera, that was sitting dormant. And what they did is they put that they allocate that marketing budget right into some of those metro areas where these minority consumers or diverse consumers were hit the most. And what they want to do there was to show that not only do we want your business, and we want to compete for you to buy, again, our Ford, our General Motors, our Toyota, our Honda, our luxury vehicles, but we're here in your time of need. So I thought that was really key, and I give kudos to those OEMs that did it. Quite a few of them, again, won't put on infomercial here, but if you're watching the news, quite a few of them are making respirators and making masks and convert their facilities to do so. I think that's huge. And I think that's one thing that more of the OEMs in the entire auto space is going to have to do, including the dealers. You know, they're going to have to compete for their share of this pent up demand. So I'll lead myself to the second thing, pent up demand. I've been talking to a lot of the auto space about, hey, this COVID thing came in like a storm in the night, but everybody that wanted a new car before the storm rolled in still wants a new car,
Right.
plus others. And so it's just a matter of how can you put your best foot forward? Where's that unique niche that you can find that shows, one, we care, and then diverse consumers have always been, I'm speaking primarily African Americans, Hispanics, and also Asians, about this word respect. Show us that you respect our culture, that you truly care about our culture, and then they're now looking at reciprocating and spending dollars with you. So I think those are a couple things, and then I'll pass the mic to a couple other panelists to share their thoughts. But those are some of my thoughts there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know you also highlighted the SUVs and the luxury vehicles. And I know in conversation with all of you, we actually learned that you all believe the product mix is going to change moving forward. And so that, of course, will have to also change the marketing in order to sell more of the SUVs and the trucks and the luxury vehicles. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more on that from you, Roman, if you want to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for sharing those points. Very, very relevant to mention that COVID-19 is real, and we are all going through a difficult phase. So are both individuals and corporates. I agree with both the panelists. There's a shift towards digital. There's a change in consumer behavior away from shared mobility towards individual ownership. And also agree with Mark that the minorities are there's a pent-up demand, and the minorities are looking for who is speaking to them. There's a strong association with brand and types of vehicles that they buy. But given the situation we are in, we also have to consider that we're coming out into a new normal. And in this new normal, the dealerships are working with very little margins, and therefore their ability to put money towards marketing, especially on the mass market vehicles like the smaller sedans, is going to be limited. And you'll see them putting a lot more money towards SUVs, etc., where there's a higher profit margin. And this could play out in many different ways. You could see the advertising becoming a little bit more generic for those models, and OEMs also shifting their messaging also towards a little bit more. I mean, well, not all OEMs. I would say the domestic OEMs shifting their message a little bit more towards SUVs and larger vehicles, and then you see the foreign the import OEMs trying to sell more of the mass market vehicles. It's yet to be seen how the buying behavior across demographics will evolve. But my understanding is that that you'll see more generic advertising across the mass market models.
Interesting that you touch on that, because I know Mark really likes to get into the details of the different cultures that buy the different cars and really work together with the OEMs on developing those different marketing strategies by providing those multicultural insights. And I know, Mark, in previous conversations, you like to highlight what groups like to buy what cars. And I think for our audience today, this would be relevant as well if you could share a little bit more on that. And then also, how do you think that is going to be changed and affected due to our current situation? So what are the different groups buying now? And do you see that changing with the product mix and the marketing being adjusted in the future?
So again, for the sake of our time here, and then not to over inundate anybody, I'm gonna hit you with some high level facts. One, this thought that you see in a lot of mainstream papers, Automotive News, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, that cars are dead, is the biggest misnomer out there. When you look at 50% of the top 10 vehicles for minority consumers are cars. And again, if I have to name some nameplates, it's Camry, Accord, the Altima, Corolla from Toyota, and the Civic from Honda are some of the leading volume players in the car choices of minority consumers. But equally so, another fact is that pickup trucks, which again, the Detroit 3 are dominant, with the F-150 being the #1 selling vehicle for the past 40 years and running. But Ram is a strong contender now, and Silverado is still in there from Chevrolet. African Americans, although late to the game, are big in the pickup truck game. And I think that's going to continue as well because gas prices are low. My fiance came back to me a week ago. We were at Sam's Club and gas was almost like, it was just a little more than $1 a gallon.
Right.
That's going to bode well for the pickup market and the bigger SUVs, which the Detroit 3 dominate in that space. So those are two facts there. Another fact I want to throw at you is women. And again, it's one thing I joke about all the time, but I'm dead serious about it, that I have a hard time understand why I have to convince automotive marketers that, to market to women, when the one thing we have in common, we all come from a woman, right? And we're raised by women. But women, as far as new vehicle sales, not only have 85% influence on all vehicles being purchased, all purchases, whether they buy it or not, whether they know you or not. But women now represent almost 44% of new vehicle registrations in total. But when you look at the minority segment, specifically African Americans are the only consumer group where women actually consume the majority of the new vehicles within their cultural group. Women represent almost 52% of all African American vehicle sales, where African American males only 48%. So I say that to say another change that's going to come out is that marketers, now that there's going to be less face-to-face and more to digital, you're going to have to shift it big time towards women, towards female marketing. Finally, we're going to have to wake up, and it's forcing us to do that. The last thing I'm going to say, and I'm going to pass it over to my panelists because they may have more insight on this than me. But what I do know, as I said earlier, anything that has to do with sharing or touching, we've all become somewhat germaphobes, right? Everybody wants to, hey, you don't have a mask on. Hey, that doesn't look clean. I don't want to be bothered. So I've heard the comment that that there are women out there that say, I refuse to touch a gas pump ever again. So that could be a key sign. Again, I'll turn over to Roman and Daniel shortly, but I think that there's going to be a huge opportunity for us to finally buoy up the EV sales in America, which EVs only represent like less than 2% of all new vehicle sales, and it's half of that with minority consumers. And I think what we got to do is start looking at the mid-level and also the affluence may look more to now EV because they have it in the privacy of their home where they can charge it up and nobody's touched it. I drive it out and I don't have to go to as they say, a crappy gas pump. But I think that's not going to happen unless there's some strong educational campaigns. Mm-hmm. And again, I will say this and I'm going to be done. There was a lady that came to me one time after I was speaking, a grandmother, and I was talking about EVs, and she came back and said, you're a good speaker, honey, but I'm not putting my grandson in the frying pan. And I said, whoa, who are you talking about? And she said, you've heard that thing, hey, electric and water don't mix. And if he has a fender bender, those firemen are going to put water on my baby and fry them. I say that to say, in my final statement, that the OEMs need to put out an aggressive and more broader educational campaign so that the masses understand what the benefits are to own an electric vehicle, and that, you know, small things like, which are big, that 80% or 70% of the gas stations, that the fire stations have foam and water, not just water, anti-static foam. So with that, I'll turn over to my other panelists, but hopefully that helps set the tone for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mark. You mentioned two really key facts, and one is being, you know, the lack of marketing to women, and then also from an EV perspective, the lack of education. And so I would love for Dania to follow this up, because I know at Escalent, there has been a recent study that was published in regards to EV. And even though I know that you try to be a little bit careful with EVs and advising on EVs, especially now during the crisis, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the study, Dania, and the cultural impact there, as well as what your thoughts are on marketing to women. What have you seen being a woman in this space?
Oh gosh, there's a lot there. So let me try and chunk it out. So specific to EVs, yes, our segmentation research identified there's some people who absolutely love electric vehicles, and there's some people who absolutely hate electric vehicles, and there's a whole in between. And there's been an incredible amount of investment into electric vehicles by the OEMs and their supplier base. And EVs over the past 10 years or so have improved tremendously. The cost has come down, battery performance has improved considerably. You know, you're looking at 200 miles per charge easily. In many cases, it's 300, and you know, Tesla's touting that the Cybertruck is going to get 500 miles per charge. So the cost has come down and the performance of the battery has gotten better, and those are two key drivers of purchase decision. So range anxiety is much less of an issue. And there's going to be a lot more choices, right? I mean, automotive news, I think by 2022, in a couple of years, there's going to be 100 electric vehicle models to choose from. So the days of small cars that don't go very far before it needs a charge, those days are over. We're seeing that current owners of electric vehicles, you know, over 40% of them are considered non-white. Almost 50%, about 47, 48% are female, and almost 60% are millennial or Gen Z. So there's a lot going for electric vehicles. However, as Mark said, given the impact of COVID-19 and the employment issues and all of that, that's going to make consumers more price sensitive. And you couple that, as Mark said, with you know, incredibly low gas. Electric vehicles are probably not going to be top of mind for most buyers right now. However, if a dealer starts to embrace more non-traditional sales approaches, acquisition models that could very well put electric vehicles in the hands of buyers who are interested but have no or limited experience through a car subscription model or through a short-term rentals or a micro lease. So moving away from the traditional ownership model and personal vehicle ownership to a new innovative approach to give consumers more choice, hands-on experience, and that's going to be critical for electric vehicles, given that our research shows that people who are interested in electric vehicles but don't really have any real hands-on experience, they equate charging a vehicle to charging your phone. So as Mark said, education is critical here The OEMs, in my opinion, have trailed in that area. So there's a huge opportunity for education, but it's going to be up to the dealers to really embrace alternative sales models to move some of this new technology and to allow consumers experience this new technologies and really at a first-hand experience with the benefits and advantages this new technology can offer. So I'm seeing that we can move away from personal ownership, but still get people's needs met through a variety of different sales.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is
thank you so much, Dania. Those are some really good insights, and I think our audience is enjoying the fact that we're also touching a little bit here on EVs. I'm getting some feedback here throughout the conversation, and so I want to loop in Roman too, because he has a lot of strategic consulting experience in the automotive space. And so Roman, with your experience, not just here in the US, but you really have worked internationally. And as of recent, you've spent a lot of time in Germany and going back and forth between Germany and the US in regard to your work. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the strategic investments that you think could be made for the long-term gain as it relates to everything we just talked about, especially with the EVs in the mix.
Yeah, this is a very interesting space, and I should actually thank Dania for doing a good job of explaining what's going on with EVs, because makes my job a lot easier. So to add to what she said, one interesting development we will see around EVs in the present crisis is that the OEMs will increase their cooperation around around EV technologies and move away from the highly competitive mindset they had before, due to the lack of investments and the pressure on the cost margins, and also probably some changes in government policy, which we're already seeing right now. There is a push by the US government to reduce the CO2 targets, and also the EV subsidies. With that being said, the increase of cooperation between OEMs and the low-cost segments for EVs will accelerate the EV platform consolidation, and that could actually bring costs down. So we were already moving towards a future where EVs were going to become more affordable, mainstream, and now we're going to see that happening a lot sooner. What's also interesting to note is there is a need for supporting infrastructure to increase the adoption of EVs, meaning we need, in addition to home charging, we also need public charging networks. And that's where it gets very interesting with this current crisis. I noticed someone comment on the Zoom chat before that they would love to not have to touch at gas stations, pump again.
Right.
Well, yeah. And with EVs, you still have to do public charging. I mean, if you're traveling for a longer distance, or you happen to be on the road when you need to be charging again, so you'll go to a public charging station. And what's interesting is there are new technologies around charging, like inductive charging, where I mean, if there are some chargers with your phones where you would just place your phone on top of something and your phone gets charged, right? So the same way there's inductive charging now, which means you can drive your car above a certain platform and just park it there, and a car would charge, so you're not touching anything at all. And there are several companies working on this. There is an example, Momentum Dynamics, which is a company in the US, a startup in the US, which is developing these technologies for public charging networks. So you will see a lot of these technologies also playing out in the next couple of years. But what we see happening is there would be an acceleration towards EV platform consolidation. So there would be, there may not be many different options for the low cost segment, but the low cost segment can get cheaper sooner, which could actually accelerate EV adoption, given there's also public charging networks being constructed at the same time.
Thank you for all of those EV insights. I think our audience is really enjoying this because we're getting a lot of questions. And as you may know, if you've been to one of our panels in person, actually, we like for these conversations to really be engaging and be interactive. And so with this being our first virtual panel, we're still trying to better understand what everybody's looking for and what works best. And so I have a few questions here that I'd like to share here in a minute with our panelists. But before I do so, I do have one last question for you all, Mark, Roman, and Dania, and that is, what do you recommend to both OEMs and our multicultural consumers as we slowly return to a new normal? And so I know you've shared a little bit of feedback. I know, Mark, you were touching on the lack of education that is present at OEMs and to better improve that. But today we have people here from OEMs, we have agencies, we have multicultural consumers on our panel. And so I'd love to give feedback and information to all of them as much as possible. So think of it from the OEM perspective and the B2B, but then also the B2C side. What is it that you would recommend to all of these? Mark, we'll start with you.
Okay, so again, everybody that knows me and most of the people on the phone or that are calling in that are my customers know, if nothing else, I'm a gentleman. So I would like for Dania to go first because ladies are always first.
All right, let's do that, Dania.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I was thinking, but what comes top of mind to me is that, so many people, we didn't even really have to do research, but we did. But so many people have been touched by COVID-19. We saw in our research that, 3/4 of Americans say that the coronavirus has impacted their family in a major or in somewhat way. And financially, again, a similar, over 3/4 have said they've been impacted financially, either a lot or some. And that type of impact goes across all groups. It doesn't matter if you're African American, doesn't matter if you're Asian, doesn't matter if you're old, young, male, female, it's touched everybody. So it's broad and it's deep, and everybody's experience and how they react to that experience is going to be slightly different. So moving forward, OEMs and other mobility ecosystem players, they really need to understand how different groups have been impacted and how those needs are evolving and changing as a result of their personal experience with the disease and, muddling through the whole shelter in place and lockdown and all of that. This is not a case where, okay, you can take a broad sweep and basically, for the most part, most of people's needs are going to be addressed. They have to step back, take a very empathetic approach to this. This is the time they really have to be committed and demonstrate that they're customer-centric and really understand how this experience has touched people in a different way. And women may be touched differently than men. And what we saw in our research that, regardless of age, for the most part, you were impacted, but those 60, 65 and older were less likely to say that they've been financially impacted, that they were more concerned about contracting the disease. And I think that's simply a reflection that they are less likely to be entrenched in the workforce, and they have some savings or assets set aside, so they're not impacted so much financially. But the point is, this is not a broad sweep. Everybody is being touched by this in their own unique way. And OEMs and other mobility ecosystem players really need to understand.
Yeah, thank you, Dania. I think, like you said, the focus is really going to be, it's more so pushing us to really focus on those different multicultural groups, and same with the digital space. I think up to now, there's been a strong emphasis on pushing your business and your efforts to the digital space. But I think with us going through these times now, it's more so, I don't want to say forcing necessarily, but it's really pushing you to figure out how to make it work digitally and how to make it work reaching those different groups in different ways and in unique ways, like you said, Dania. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Dania just mentioned. It's a very interesting topic, how we will be shifting towards digital, and also how there are going to be different customer demographics, because everyone's being affected by this crisis differently. And that's a very good point Dania made. And that's also a good point to make to OEMs also, to understand that when they are reaching out to their potential customers, to empathize with them, to understand that they all are facing a different crisis. And one way to do that is through digital. So even before COVID-19, we have been shifting our consumer behavior towards buying vehicles, have been shifting slowly towards digital. We did a study before, and it showed that out of the 24 touch points that a customer could have with an OEM's product, 19 are digital. And 5 of the physical touch points, there's only 2 that are really visiting a dealership and test driving a vehicle. And the other 3 are like newspapers and asking your friends and family, or seeing a TV ad. Mm-hmm. And all the other 19 touch points are all digital. They comprise searching on Google, visiting the OEM website, looking at pictures, requesting a quote online, etc. So this shift has already happened before COVID-19, and the OEMs have been a little late to the game in understanding this, because we have seen over the last couple of years that dealers have been getting into the digital game more than the OEMs. You see dealers in different states and regions competing with OEMs on search keywords, etc. So if I'm an OEM, and if I understand that I'm now limited with my marketing budget, my margins are being compressed, and I have to now reach out, or I have to speak to different demographics, different multicultural demographics, and also people who are affected by the crisis differently. My way to do that is through digital, and I need to now up my digital game. And that's exactly the advice I'll make to OEMs. And for consumers, I would say, people who have been very traditional in their consumer behavior of going to the dealerships where they bought their vehicles before, coming back there and test driving vehicles, I would definitely advise them to explore all of the other channels through which they can understand what are the options out there. Mm-hmm. And definitely one of them is digital. Yes.
Thank you, Roman.
Okay, so I will come on, but I want to first go back and just say that I was raised that every perceived bad situation, if you look into it deeper, provides an opportunity. And so when I look at COVID-19, yes, it's a horrible situation that we're currently in and we've been facing. But 4 things I've seen that have come out of it, to me, that are positives. Number 1 being, I think we've all learned to finally respect each other's space and seek it out, but also equally give it. Number 2, the importance of physical health. Again, when it first came out, it was, hey, if your system is not right, or if you're not as physically fit, I've seen more people without the access to gyms, et cetera, walking and running and just trying to be physically active. 3, the fact that we were forced to learn how we could use technology to get our jobs done outside of the traditional office. And I think that's something that's going to be a long lasting change. I mean, that now we're using Zoom like we're doing right now, and Teams, right, and other social media, just being more collaborative, but not having to be in the same physical space. But last but not least on this end, before I get to the automotive points, is we've been talking for a long time. Let's say we definitely as a senior leader in a global organization about work-life balance. And it hasn't really gone anywhere until this COVID thing flew in here. And now what I see is that, you know, by being at home, and if you're in a multi-individual, again, household with kids, a spouse or whatever, just being able to work on Zoom and have a conference call, but you can look over and see your spouse, or you can see your kids playing. And I'll just quote, give it an anecdote. One of my colleagues, one of my executive colleagues, we have our leadership meetings, and I think it's so cool that she's sitting on one side of the dining room table doing a Teams meeting with us, and on the other side of the table, when the kids were in school a couple weeks ago, her 3 kids were doing their homework. And I think that was so fulfilling for her as a mother, that she could get her work done, but actually sit and witness and watch the growth and maturity of her children. So I say all that to say that although forced, you know, this COVID thing has made family time, it's become number one again, right? Again, work-life balance. So with that, how that applies to automotive, I think COVID has forced us to rethink some historical practices that may be outdated. Number one, I'll repeat, women's marketing. I mean, I think now this is going to say, hey, we're going to go out because if nothing else, automotive is uber competitive. Hey, when General Motors does something, Ford wants to come back at it. And when Ford does something, Toyota wants to come back at it, and Honda, and then the luxuries have their own different fight. I think it's going to force us to finally say women's marketing needs to be an active pillar within the marketing organization and not a sideshow. Okay, that's one. 2, ethnic marketing. I am so tired as one diversity leader, just negate the fact that I'm African-American male, just looking at the data, that anytime things get tight, the first thing the OEMs want to cut is, no diversity marketing. It's one size fits all, total marketing, or whatever spin you want to put on it. And I think what this is going to do is raise up the fact that one size does not fit all. Not on the impact side, so when we look at how COVID has impacted African Americans with 70% plus of the fatalities, and again, big markets like Detroit, New York, Philadelphia, and others, then equally so in the marketing and reach outside. You have to balance the scales out, right? And then African Americans sometimes walk to the beat of a different drum than their Hispanic or Latin peers. Their Hispanic and Latin peers walk to the beat of a slightly different drum than their Asian and Indian peers, and vice versa, and the same with our Caucasian peers. So we need to do some tentacles and again be more active on the proactive diversity marketing side. And last but not least, I think this is definitely going to force us to revamp the retail experience, right? I mean, I think now it's going to become, these are some ideas where, hey, this whole touchless, go online, identify the vehicle you want, build the vehicle. Yes, it should still come through a dealer, no doubt about it. I'm not trying to put dealers out of business. We got to just retool how we're doing it. But then, hey, maybe when I pick the car, just like how Amazon has made this multi-$100 billion business on delivering packages to your home, right to your door, maybe we deliver the cars right to people's door, right in their driveway. And so they feel secure in this new normal that, hey, I don't have a driver that's driving my car, or I don't have to go and meet with salespeople or finance people who may be COVID positive, but not have any effects, right? Hey, the car got dropped off, it's sanitized, I get to drive it, I'm the only one that's driven it, and that's the way I want to go. And I think we need to look at that, and therefore we're going to have to beef up. The OEMs are going to have to work with their dealer, their retail partners, to beef up and come with a consistent digital presence, a digital footprint. And I'm going to throw out one last thing, and it's definitely going to be some help needed for the 1,100 minority dealers out of the 16,000. Why? Because most of those men and women are my friends or consider me family. And the one thing that they say often, again, they'll say something like, hey, a big a mega deal like Penske or the Suburban Collection, for every billion that they make, or every million that a minority dealer makes, they make $1 billion. So it's not a level playing field. And so somebody mentioned, I think it was Danya mentioned earlier, they may have their digital game together. I think the OEMs are going to have to step in and help all of their retail network, because it goes back to that old adage that you're only as good as your weakest link, right? And not calling anybody weak, but if you can buoy, and then the whole other saying is high tides raises all boats. If you can raise up everybody, you raise up the profile of the overall OEM, and therefore you can compete in this super uber competitive post-COVID new vehicle market, new and used vehicle market. So those are my thoughts there, and I think those are some tangible things. I think that all of the marketing execs, agency leaders, OEM executives, dealers, suppliers. And the last thing I will say, I think in revamping the retail experience, I think one of the things that has to happen is we need to bring marketing, the retailers, and finance together more closely. I work with most of these OEMs and all these OEMs from the inside, and one thing I see is they're still siloed. That marketing can create the greatest aspiration and get somebody out of bed to a dealership, but if the dealer's not in line and they don't show that diverse consumer respect in the first 1 minute or so, they're out of there. And when they walk away from that dealer, they're not walking away from that dealer, they walk away from the entire brand. And if those two are aligned, but then you sit down at the finance table and they can't get you financed or get your deal bought for a price that you can accept, it's all for naught. So those three have to come together and work in sync for everything and I hope that this COVID situation forces that alignment to happen. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much for your thoughts. Those are some really valuable items to take away, and I appreciate everybody's feedback today. And I think this is a good transition into some of our questions that our audience has shared, especially as it relates to women. So we've been getting a lot of different questions about this here, and one of them I'll share here from Ida is, given African American women buy a lot of cars, why is it that many of the automotive companies do not feel that they must financially support the causes to connect and market to African American women? I think that's a great follow-up question to the last point that you just shared, Mark, to make that connection between finance and marketing especially. And so maybe one of you can take that question.
I'll jump in and just say that, again, I'll repeat something, but I like, and again, everybody on the phone that knows me knows I do repeat because I just want to pound home a message. When you think about African American women represent 52% of all African American new vehicle purchases, but then you compound that with women overall of all cultural backgrounds influence 85% of all new vehicle deals. I think the way to the African American household is through the women. And I'll say the same for Hispanic. I'm gonna say the same for Asian. I'm gonna say the same for Caucasian. And the last thing I'll say on that topic is, if you just think of it this way and be honest with yourself, if a gentleman is in a retail showroom, I don't care what cultural background they are, and a lady, whether they're attracted to him or not, but definitely if they're attracted to him in any form, says, hey, I think such and such a named person, you will look good in that car. You better believe that man is working to get in that car, if not today, sometime in the future. And I think the automakers need to embrace that and start again, making women primary in some of these creatives and not again a sideshow.
And so the stats regarding the women, Meredith shares here and is asking, she said, haven't these stats regarding women's purchasing power been out here for years? Dania and Roman, do you have any input that you could share?
I was just going to say the OEMs, they know this. I mean, we know this from research. The OEMs, the marketing teams, the product development teams, they know what influence females have in the purchase decision process. I think there's ebbing and flowing. That sometimes they're spot on and sometimes they tend to forget about that influence, as Mark said. There is a lot of still working in silos. But when you think about the transition from more in-person showroom presentation of the vehicle purchasing process to more of a digital experience, I mean, gender kind of goes out the window. So you're not always, the digital sales guy doesn't always know that they're engaging with a male or a female, right? they're responding to a quote until they engage with that person on the phone or invite the person to the showroom. So, you know, while we need to understand the influence that women have, switching to a digital environment, I might be going out on a limb here, gender may become a little bit less important.
Okay, yeah. That's interesting because we continue to get questions on women and cultures and why those rates are different, especially as it relates to African American women purchasing and registering their vehicles. We have a question here asking as to why that number is higher for African American women versus Caucasian women from a cultural perspective.
I want to jump in and answer that one. And again, this may be sensitive to some, but it's true. When you look at the, you have to answer that question holistically, Lydia, you have to look at the incarceration rates. You have to look at the divorce rates, the single family home rates within the African American community. So the African American woman is more often would probably be desired the leader in the household, the breadwinner in the household, and therefore those new vehicle registration rates are representative of that. So that's a bigger conversation, but that's the big part of the answer. But based on that being the answer, that's the situation it is today, and the marketers need to recognize that and recognize African American women for the strength that they have in the African American household and the community, and market to them accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And I have one more comment, Lydia, going back to what Daniel was saying in the prior question. And again, I am going out on a limb here. How long has our mothers and grandmothers told us, hey, you need to wash your hands before you touch your face? And all of us, I mean, as a stereotypical statement, have negated to do so. Now COVID comes in here and says, hey, there's this virus that nobody knows what it is, doesn't know what it looks like. But one thing you do to protect yourself is wash your hands, sanitize your hands. And the hand sanitizer business has never seen a boom like this. Neither has the antibacterial soap business. And so it's an opportunity for us as a, just as a group, the U.S. community, to just change some of the things that have been ingrained for so long that may be outdated.
Right.
That's my example.
Thank you so much. And I see that we're getting to an end here, and I want to make sure that we end on time here and give everybody the chance to return back to their workflow. And so I want to thank you so much for attending our virtual panel discussion today, and a big thanks to our panelists for making time to share their insights and thoughts here with us today as it relates to multicultural auto buying during COVID-19. A few things before you leave today. As you exit the webinar, there is going to be a survey that populates for you to share feedback. And again, as this was our first online panel as part of our speaker event series that we are looking to potentially continue and host in the future, we would love to hear your thoughts as to how we can make this best for all of you attending. So you can also visit blendedcollective.com for more information on what we do in the multicultural marketing, diversity and inclusion space, and feel free to email us at info@blendedcollective.com with any questions. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope that you were able to take a lot of key insights away as it relates to the auto industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lydia, for putting this together. Thank you.
Yes, Lydia,
Thank you, Lydia.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Daniel.
Take care, Roman. Take care, Danya.
Yep,
Take
take
care.
care. Have a good day.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, you too.